So good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on which part of the world you're joining us from today. And thank you very much for tuning in. And thank you, Max, for the invitation to be part of this really great webinar series. And as Max has said, I'm Sandra Ryan, and I lecture in Immaculate College. It's teacher education for undergraduate teachers. I work in the primary elementary teacher section. We also have programs for second level teachers. And just to say that teacher education programs in Ireland are still very sought after, and we're really lucky to work with high performing students who are highly motivated to become teachers. And also, just from what Max read there, just to note as well that the focus of all of my research has been in the context of socioeconomic disadvantage, so poverty, inequality, and interculturalism, and so on. And the research I'm presenting here today is based on one STEM field experience that we ran for 3 years. And I'd like to acknowledge my wonderful colleagues in science education, Dr. Maeve Liston and Dr. Eleanor Walsh, who were and are such an integral part of this initiative. It's a great partnership, and it really emphasizes, some of the important things that I'll raise later about doing this work in teacher education. This particular research was published in 2025, and I've included links at the end of the presentation for any of you who are interested in greater detail. And I'd also like to acknowledge some funding that we received for this work from the EDII office in MIC. So as I was preparing for the talk and thinking through the complex issues involved, I kind of was reminded of the old question of why we do this work and why is family, school, community partnership important. And anybody who's working in this field knows the work of Professor Joyce Epstein at Johns Hopkins University, and who's been doing this research for over 50 years now. And this model is one that she calls overlapping spheres of influence. And just to bring us back to the child who's at the center of these three major contexts in which they learn and grow. And those are the three education partners that we're typically talking about during this work: family, school, and community. And Joyce's theory really here is that these overlapping spheres of influence can be brought together to overlap more, or they can be pushed apart. And the more connections we build and the more overlap between the spheres of influence, the better for the child and for all partners, actually, not only in terms of outcomes. And I know how much focus is in place on education outcomes. And of course, that's really important. But it's also important for us to always stop to remember the day-to-day experiences we all have. So for the children, it's so formative. For young children, this is their life. It's the beginning of their life, and it really makes such an impact on them going through their lives. And we can all remember teachers we had as children and how they made us feel, really, to think about Bell Hooks and Maya Angelou. And for parents and families, the same thing, particularly for parents who may be marginalized or struggling due to poverty or mental health or addiction or whatever other issues they're encountering daily. But also for us as educators who want the best for our students and who want our students to succeed, to reach their potential. We're all human, and the daily challenges are easier to surmount when we pull together. So, and this is where most schools and teachers need some support and ideas, and one size doesn't fit all in building strong education partnerships. So just to keep that in focus. And you'll be familiar with the ongoing discussion of terminology in the field, and I'm using parent engagement here under the umbrella of partnership as defined by Joyce Epstein, and we won't get into that today. So there are a range of positive outcomes associated with parent family engagement, school family partnerships, and we've over 5 decades of comprehensive and robust research evidence on the range of outcomes. For students, I've just picked out the student ones here, but also for teachers and families and communities. And this research has also been very positively framed in the context of school improvement and school reform. So it's really important and a really strong evidence base. And yet, in spite of this, parent or family engagement is too often at the periphery of school practices and school improvement initiatives. And there are many reasons why this is the case, but one of the biggest reasons is that teachers or educators and school leaders have very few, if any, opportunities early on or throughout their careers to learn what school family community partnership looks like and how to do this work. And it does require a change in the way we work. As Janet Goodall and Debbie Pusher both referred to during the launch of Max's and colleagues' recent excellent book, it requires a change in hearts and minds of teachers, and it requires us to not to keep doing the same things the same way we always did. But it also requires, change in hearts and minds for parents and children, and they will do that by seeing changes in our practices. So the challenge for teachers and educators is, they find that establishing relationships with families is the most significant challenge when they enter the profession, and their teachers report very high levels of anxiety in their encounters with families. And Epstein, as far more than 30 years ago, had identified the need for improving teacher education and training, and we're still working towards that. And that need is well established as well for a long time, but still most teacher education programs worldwide do very little to prepare teachers to establish relationships. And Ireland is no exception. Now, and Max mentioned that I introduced a course on working with families in 2012, and it was the first of its kind, but it was an elective course for undergraduate students. So only 30 out of a cohort, maybe of 450 to 500, only about 30 students were taking that course. So even that was quite limited. Now, in recent times, increased legislation and as well as accreditation standards in many countries are now requiring teachers to work in partnership. And since 2020, in the Irish context, we have new accreditation standards that require programs to include professional relationships and working with parents. And that's been coming on stream really only in the past 2 years. And we'll see how it gets implemented nationally. But in MIC, we've introduced a standalone module at undergraduate and postgraduate level. So that's very promising. The challenge then is what to do, how to develop the teacher education program. So this Science for Fun research that I'm talking about today is one initiative that we developed to bring parents and children together along with the student teachers in a non-threatening and engaging environment. And the concept, so what we did was, with my two colleagues, Eleanor and Maeve, we ran a STEM workshop with the student teachers to prepare them for these two workshops on electricity and magnetism. And these would be topics that they're studying anyway in their science education modules. And the concepts of electricity and magnetism were chosen because they're familiar to many parents and children through the everyday lives, and there's real world relevance and applications and familiarity. And the idea was to stimulate curiosity among the children, but also to build a little bit of confidence among the parents who wouldn't have specifically studied or felt confident in delivering scientific information as such. So by doing that, we're building science capital, and there are lots of reasons why that's important. So the students then did 2 visits to the schools, and how that worked was that for the first 30 minutes, you can see here the students and the parents worked together. They worked through what was going to happen during the session with the children. And it's designed as a co-delivery model. So the student teachers and the parents led the station teaching sessions with the children. And we had 5 stations of 10 minutes each. And Maeve and Eleanor designed it with a spiral approach when designing these station activities. So the children were increasing their understanding about a topic from one station to the next. And then after that 50 minutes, parents and students, our MIC students, debriefed and evaluated and had a chat. And that was quite important too, the informal interactions actually from the student's point of view, from my student's point of view. So that we had 3 elementary schools which were DESH Band 1. We call it DESH, designated disadvantage, located in areas classified. We have a deprivation index nationally across the country based on electoral divisions and so on. But so these schools are in areas that are designated as very disadvantaged or extremely disadvantaged on that index. And we also chose schools that serve a high percentage of families from the Irish traveller community, which are the most marginalised group in Irish education in terms of very low participation rates, but also issues in relation to housing, health, and so on. So 3 principals, 4 class teachers, 3 HSCL, they're the homeschool liaison, teachers who work directly with parents, and they were great to recruit parents, invite them in, and so on. That really took away that responsibility from us. We had 30 undergraduate student teachers, 88 children, 3rd grade, so they're 8, 9 to 10, and 32 of their parents and guardians took part over the course of the 2 weeks. And these are the research questions. So we were interested to know student teachers' attitudes about working with parents before and after these sessions. And we wanted to know, what did they learn from the experience? What were their evaluations of it? And what did they see as the implications for their future classroom practice? And then we also ourselves were noting and observing the challenges of the work. And the student teachers completed reflections before the first workshop and then after each workshop. So we had 23 full matched responses out of the 30 that participated for different reasons. We didn't have matched pairs for everybody. And we saw it was actually phenomenal, moving from fear to confidence. And I know Debbie mentioned in discussing Max's book launch, this fear that educators have about working with parents, and equally parents are fearful as well. And there was a massive transformation of attitudes, it's in just one workshop. So before the workshop, 22 out of the 23 that responded, for whom we have matched responses, reported feeling apprehensive or nervous and unsure. And it was really palpable, actually, even on the morning of the first school visit, that, and their main concern was, how do I relate to parents without being condescending? What do I say to them? And it was interesting that different personalities in terms of both our student teachers and the parents, had different levels of comfort. They were outside their comfort zone, some of them more than others. Others were more relaxed and confident. And the preparation sessions were really important in that, from that point of view. It was a chance to break the ice and to get to know each other a little bit. And we could see these some people being more comfortable than others. And the majority of our student teachers, we learned, were only comfortable when they were paired up with a peer. And a few were relaxed enough to work alone, but actually very few. It was interesting to see that. No, they really did not want to work on their own. So they needed that support of a peer. But after workshop 1, then, they were all overwhelmingly positive. The language that they used, it was just phenomenal. And they overcame this fear and began viewing them as valuable assets rather than as potential problems. One quote, working with parents is not something to be afraid of. Once communication is developed, it's clear parents want to learn and participate in their child's education. So some of the learning that they identified was that they developed an overall awareness and openness to their own role and a broader perspective on parents' role in education. So they saw their own role as to put parents at ease. They noted that all parents are different, that parents will get involved at different levels and with different supports. And we had one mother, for example, who came along, and she was experiencing huge anxiety due to family issues that were going on for her, so that she really wasn't able to to participate in the sessions with the children. And this class teacher took the opportunity to build a bond with that mother and, connected her and made her feel good about the fact that she had actually come along, even though she felt that she didn't have the confidence to participate. And it was interesting that the students could see that, it made an impact on them. They could see that, and they could see how appropriately the class teacher and kindly and the compassion that the teacher had for that mother. But they also became more confident then in terms of their own relational and communicational skills. And this is one student said the first minutes were awkward, but focusing on the science activities and asking about their children helped to break the ice. So they learned the skills of just trying to build a common ground with parents. They noted that all parents are different and trust develops gradually, and that building relationships takes time. And you could say that, they also got the know-how, how it works. So physically, how this operates, from the time I go into the classroom with my box of science tricks, and then how it all works. So that was reassuring for them. And then they could see that parents have valuable insights, and it challenged the assumptions. They were challenging their own assumptions about parents. Some parents are unsure how to help, but it's not that they don't care. So they were really able to see beyond that. And one student said, I understood how beneficial parental involvement can be from lecture content. However, this experience helped me to really see this in action. So, I could be lecturing for months about these results, but it was interesting that the student could see, oh yeah, that's what all these lectures are about. So intensive field experience, in this example, it did transform the attitudes. The students observed benefits for children. The children were more excited and enthusiastic because the parents were present. There were higher attention levels and engagement. They had increased self-confidence when their parents were there. They could see they were getting a message from their parents that science is important. There was a motivation, according to our students. They observed children more motivated to problem solve and to impress their parents. And it showed, by the parents being interested in being there, it showed children that science was important. And it was interesting too, we had several examples where a mother came on the first session and then made sure that the dad, that her partner or husband, came the second time round. It was interesting. And we had a few grannies and granddads who were sent along because a parent couldn't come the second time. So the parents themselves who were involved really took it on board and felt the importance of it. And many of them, feedback from them, we're still working through that feedback, but they were there because their child asked them to be. And we know that from our research in the field as well. So the students noted the value of parent engagement and positive communication for their future. And they said that the vast majority of them said they'll involve parents in their classrooms. And one student said, how you present yourself to the parents is really important in terms of demeanour and disposition. Another one noted that I will definitely bring parents into the classroom for station teaching activities. I found it a really nice touch that at the end, the parents were given a round of applause to thank them for coming in, and they were invited into the staff room to have a cup of tea. This is very simple, but could mean a huge deal to a parent. I will for sure include these small gestures when inviting parents into the classroom. So the small things, the things that seem so small, but really are important, to develop that understanding. Now, feedback from students. Now, I've been lecturing, this is my 26th year, and any of you who are lecturers will know how these little nuggets are like gems, So these are just a few of the comments, but it was very nice, I must say, to get this positive feedback from students, which we don't always get, and especially when you have cohorts of up to 500 students, it's impossible to have conversations with them all even. But one said, I thoroughly enjoyed this experience. It was really beneficial. I learned a lot. Many of them made specific points in terms of more time with the parents or how the sessions were organised, which we took on board. And then one student said, after the second session, I feel as though there has been an attitude shift in the way I think about working with parents. It no longer feels daunting, and it is something I now look forward to doing in my future teaching. So there's, hopefully that person's mind has changed, and hopefully they will follow through with that. And that's where more research needs to be done. We need to follow up with teachers when they've been out in the field a couple of years. So the challenges for teacher education, these are contextual challenges, really. There can often be a cultural disconnect between pre-service teachers and the parents and families that they're working with. In Ireland, I'm not sure to what extent it's the same in other countries. We have a predominantly white, female and middle class group of people who entered the teaching profession. So they're quite different often from the families that they're serving. A lot of our undergraduate students in particular have no experience of being a parent, and those of us who are parents know how much we learned by being parents ourselves. Epstein talks about needing to link to school strategy, and parents' needs, and Epstein and Boone talk about that. And indeed, Debbie Pusher's work on systematic parent engagement too. It just can't be random acts of family involvement has been found in previous research. The school ethos where young teachers find themselves, can influence them as well. And often there are mixed messages from school staff, whether or not parent and partnership with families is considered important, and whether it's a priority really. And then for us in higher education, in initial teacher education, university regulations limit us in terms of how much we want or we allow student teachers to interact with families and communities. In terms of practical challenges, program overload is a huge thing, and timetabling of it, time to do this, where do we find it? And interdisciplinarity and collaboration has been identified in the literature as being important. And I collaborated in this context with my colleagues in STEM education, and I think that there is there's possibility to integrate more across subject pedagogy. So you could have courses in literacy or maths or arts or STEM, that could link into this, that we shouldn't be just standalone courses and modules. Access to schools and parents is a challenge. And, as I mentioned, some of our student numbers, some of our cohorts at undergraduate level, there's up to 500 students, and it's really impossible to replicate this kind of an experience with 500. We just wouldn't have the capacity to do it. So the implications, where you place this within an undergraduate program as well, and the readiness of these students to comprehend the complexities and the implications of what's involved. So timing within an initial teacher education program needs to be considered. And of course, the limitations of a single course or module to develop this understanding. And again, I would see the need, if we could integrate with other colleagues, where the students are getting the message from more than one person, that it's not just, that's Sandra's gig, parent engagement, but actually my colleagues in STEM are telling them the same thing. The pedagogical approach is really important. I mean, field experience like this, but also we need to challenge assumptions, and that has to incorporate interactive, discursive and reflective practices as well. And ITE, initial teacher education, can only do so much, and there is a need for continuous professional development as well. And school leadership is required for a whole school approach. So that's a quick whistle-stops tour. I look forward to hearing some of your questions. Those are some of the publications recently, and the links are there. If you care to link into those, it'll be available on the recording later. And thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, Max.